Delaney Jordan.
Okay, Delaney.
Here's a little free backstory for you. Why is my channel called Infinite Snow Productions? So being that I have just always looked and sounded like this, that has bled into my personal life in somewhat predictable ways. Which is funny, because I didn't actually grow up watching Snow White. I saw it for the first time when I was an adult, but that has not once stopped me from hearing, hey, do you know who you kind of look like? For what's shaping up to be from cradle to grave. Compounding that, we gotta face the facts. I have chronic grandma taste. My tolerance level for old-ass stuff is extremely high. I like classic Broadway musicals, I like jazz, God help me, I even like a barbershop quartet. Spiritually, I'm not just a senior citizen, I am legally dead. So if this is gonna be my life forever, fuck it, I'm leaning in. And I establish all of this to say that I can no longer abide the false gospel of Snow White discourse as protecting some sacred bastion of white culture. If you were also a Snow White enjoyer for any amount of time prior to Rachel Zegler committing the crime of not being Caucasian and also saying what the company has probably asked her to say about their very expensive movie, you know as well as I do that in the pantheon of Disney princesses, truly nobody gave a shit about Snow White. She was the world's easiest target. No one ever felt bad about making fun of her showing her age, not even the goddamn Walt Disney Company.
She is a princess!
You have run down the window of time to accuse Halle Bailey of destroying cinema, and you have nothing better to distract yourself from your deep spiritual emptiness but harassing women of color for Bob Iger's myriad crimes. You are all weak, and I am better than you. If anything, you lay it all out on the table, and Rachel Zegler is kind of the singular thing the remake has going for it. Gal Gadot has the personality of a plank. I don't know what's going on with the dwarfs, and but Zegler's performance in West Side Story is a pretty ideal frame of reference if you want to try to capture the classic Hollywood charm of Snow White without it sliding into hard caricature. She pretty much saved the damn thing from Ansel Elgort's creepy ass. That's gotta be worth some kind of reward. And at least Zegler and Bailey earned their parts based on legitimate vocal talent as opposed to, Hermione liked reading books.
Every day, like the one before.
Frankly, the fact that this film, much like the rest of the remakes, will be very likely ungood, and Zegler will have endured years of online abuse for nothing, pretty roundly proves that if anyone is doing anyone a favor here, it is hardly Disney for Zegler. But while I will defend Rachel Zegler from here to the moon because us George Lucas talk show girlies gotta stay together, that is about as far as my enthusiasm for this new Snow White can go. I'm gonna be honest, I don't know what they're doing here. Like a lot of these remakes, I think they just grabbed a property off the rack and ran with some lazy progressive marketing pitch to make it sound like a social imperative that they produce a grimy multi-million-dollar movie to hold on to their copyright. Because I remember 2012, the summer of Girl Boss Snow White, and that shit went down like a lead balloon. Which is funny, because the modern reputation of the original Snow White is not altogether the hottest.
I clean for 7 men who never give me a hand.
And who needs a man to save and kiss ya? I'm savvy, strong, single, and so independent. You're the weakest role model, while I am transcendent.
He straight up kisses a dead girl.
Yeah.
What is the most helpless you can make a female character?
Yeah.
Dead.
Animals sing songs about doing chores while Snow White sits on her ass waiting for a necrophiliac to wife her up and takes drugs from shady old people. And being that the film's age is its biggest barrier for entry, and that its iconography is so ubiquitous, not a lot of people really interrogate it past that. But clearly, there has to be something there. Otherwise, why would there be such a non-response to modern efforts? So if we go back and look at the company's adaptations of the film before irony sickness fully set in, because shocker, it's been nearly a century, they've done a couple. What core tenets of a movie which appears to be relatively plotless does the company maintain in a changing world? Is this movie adaptable at all, let alone updatable? At least the adaptations that have literally anything to do with Snow White. Sorry to the 570 enjoyers watching this video. What am I saying, 5? This is my channel. Odds are I've got at least 8.
And old sourpuss here is Grumpy, the woman hater. And last but not least is Dopey. He's nice, but sort of silly.
Snow White is fine. It's fine. It's fine. In my attempt to defend Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs as a movie which is all around good, I will not resort to needless hyperbole or use its status as a classic to deflect criticism. There are problems. Understandable problems, given that this is the first feature-length venture from guys who cut their teeth on shorts, but problems any way you slice them. I don't think it's necessarily difficult to ascertain why this is not a film which has aged as fluidly in the 21st century as something like The Wizard of Oz. At its messiest, Snow White is very much indicative of what Western cartoons were at the time. Do a song, have a sequence. Do a song, have another sequence. Sometimes that formula is very charming. Other times, even if the shenanigans are entertaining enough, it's still just a lot of shenanigans. Like, I'll go to bat for this film, but will I go as far as to act like the washing song isn't only entertaining for a third of its 5-minute runtime? Absolutely not. We can 100% be using this time in much better ways. I guess they had to audition for those malaria PSAs somewhere.
Spraying oil on the water is a sure way of killing mosquito larvae of all kinds.
But you put Snow White side by side with a contemporary like Gulliver's Travels, and I think Snow White's advantages and relative sense of emotional groundwork become much more apparent. Gulliver's Travels, released by Paramount and Fleischer Productions in 1939, is very blatantly cribbing from Snow White, but unlike Snow White, it has zero sense of when to cut the shit. Put a gun to my head, I couldn't tell you with any degree of confidence who the protagonist of this film is supposed to be. But it's the best demonstration of why the time spent developing the relationship between Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs is integral to making, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs work. Which is why I get a little annoyed when people ride this movie about the prince not being that involved. Like, put the fact that he's not in it that much because he was hard to draw to one side. He is not the central relationship. He's Snow White's reward, not the inverse. It's truly not about him. Like, fucking shit, at least he shows up early to interact with her once while she's awake. That was not in the original story. This is one of those critiques which has come around partially because the phrase love's first kiss, which is what it actually is, got Mandelaed over the years into True Love's kiss.
Have you ever had true love's kiss? Ew, barf!
And all of a sudden, everyone on the internet decided they had true love PhDs because love's first kiss is a way more innocuous term for the amount of screen time they have actually had. I'll concede that the prince being a total non-dude would still be a problem if we were meant to observe the love story as the core of the film, but as an audience, we're meant to give way more of a shit about whether or not Grumpy will ever learn to like Snow White than whatever the hell the prince is up to. It's only an issue if you don't see the dwarfs as main characters, which at that point is deliberately misreading the movie. It's not called Snow White and the Prince, or Snow White and the Animals, or Snow White and the Hunt. Okay, bad example. Cause even though it's born from the antiquated way the movie is structured, a lot of Snow White is about gradually establishing relationships. When we meet Snow White, she's isolated by the evil queen, but as the movie goes on and she falls further away from the queen, she flourishes. You see it in her interactions with the prince, the huntsman, the animals, and finally with the dwarfs. She just gets along with each new group by being genuine to everyone without judgment and appealing to their better nature. And obviously that's the exact kind of thing that drives a fake bitch insane. These are extremely simple story beats, but watching Snow White navigate her way through them does make her more endearing as characters naturally gravitate towards her. And it contrasts with the Queen's comparatively darker and quieter scenes to keep mounting tension as we watch the movie play out. This structure, basic as it may be, is something you're going to find that every adaptation moving forward largely maintains. And it goes a long way in making Disney's Snow White function because it takes the original story from being about a girl who was literally too hot for anyone to deal with like a mentally well-adjusted person and turns it into a narrative about the power of kindness. Snow White being open-minded and trusting of others single-handedly builds a little found family brick by brick. The only real danger is when people figure out that trust is exploitable. She's not stupid, it's just that her greatest strength is also her greatest weakness. While I might not necessarily like the phrase turn your brain off, because I know I am incapable of turning mine off, I think it's one which is best watched with your gut instead of your head. In its construction, it is a much simpler movie than modern audiences are really anticipating, and I think we kind of break down expecting the same level of story structure as we do from a modern film, when that's not really what this is. At its best, I'd describe it as symphonic, and a lot of that just comes from the fact that it feels good to watch. 80% of modern animated films are shit terrified of letting too much time go by without dialogue, so those moments where the movie really lets the story tell itself with the music and animation are engaging enough that you can genuinely understand why it held on to classic status, not just why it earned it in the first place. So I acknowledge it's got some room for improvement, and it is not the most cerebral film in the Disney catalog, but on top of just still looking gorgeous, narratively it works, and it works on purpose. 7 out of 10, great first outing. Pinocchio's a little bit better.
And it's all live on the most famous stage in the world. You'll also thrill to a new Disney film, Return to Oz, or later in the summer, The Black Cauldron, Disney's newest animated masterpiece.
If you're still a Snow White hater, which you're allowed to be, I do not expect to convert everyone on this. I imagine that Snow White Live is pretty close to what you're seeing when you watch the movie. And man, if that's the case, I kinda get it. Let's not get hyperbolic here. It's not like bad. There are some bright spots, namely the Queen, but that's just because I love how camp the decision is to pivot from Greta Garbo to Lucille Bluth. And the show helped save Radio City Music Hall from going out of business, so from a historical preservation perspective, that's gotta be worth something. Also, this bit makes me laugh.
She'll be buried alive! Buried alive! She'll be buried alive!
But uninteresting is probably the term best suited for what we're looking at here. It's clear that for the time they've put their money where their mouth is, but as an adaptation, this doesn't exactly scream ambition. It's the first ever Broadway production based off a Disney film until Beauty and the Beast put the Disney theatrical company on the map 15 years later, and boy, is it the first one. They've added a couple things, mostly just scenes that set up plot points we already know, like the intro song, which well, you tried. Horse. A real horse. Look at that, good horse. And a little bit of background for the evil queen, who comes from a foreign land called Shaitan. Oh no. Well, they seem nice. Okay, so we do have some additions to the lore in the form of what feels a whole heck of a lot like Orientalism, so that's cool. That's great. Also, the king is here, which is a great argument for just kind of shuffling past, and then the dad died, bit of the prologue, rather than making him more involved in the story than he really needs to be. We don't need him. There is no amount of work you can do to make me give a shit about this character. Just kill him and let everyone else do their thing. I haven't talked about Snow White as a character yet, and I think this comparison to the original is where my point might be best made. Here's the thing. Even though she's the fairest of them all because of her kindness or whatever, everyone still takes that literally and tries to judge her based on what we consider to be modern beauty standards, or at least whatever the modern equivalent of 1930s beauty standards is. Which is why I think that she has struggled a little, because the high-pitched vibrato and the hyper-realistic face don't really read the same next to your Ariels or Tianas with somewhat achievable vocal ranges. But she clearly survived a century without getting completely chucked in the bargain bin for a reason, and I have a pet theory why. Disney Snow White is conventionally pretty for a golden age Hollywood star, but that is not the source of her sustained appeal. Snow White is moe. Snow White is a cute little shoujo anime character who pokes around and gets into slice-of-life adventures and is always cheery and happy even when things get a little bit tough because you pull through with the power of friendship. And by that merit, if you have ever winced at an IRL human being saying the word senpai, you may have also picked up that the way this actress is being directed is maybe not coming off as endearingly as it would in an animated film. Especially weird when she's talking to actual little people like naughty kids instead of cartoon D&D fantasy dwarfs.
I have but one thought.
the general problem with the production. Snow White live on stage is all being portrayed very sincerely live on stage, but that doesn't necessarily make it better. Sometimes they tweak just enough to make it worse than the source. Like, you really don't have to like the original Prince, but at least that guy knew personal boundaries at minimum. Fucking Sheehan Mark Hamill over here trying to grab her and shit. Like, no! No! She doesn't like it, man! Back off! And that's just the unmasked characters being creepy. We haven't even gotten into the actors who are in masks. God, these performers are really doing some of the best work in the show, but every time Dopey is looking at the camera, I just see the great nothingness awaiting us beyond the veil at the end of all things.
And how do you do? How do you do?
I don't know, it's very obvious that this is just a family show with a big budget at the end of the day, and it's clearly hitting its audience where it needs to, but if I wanted a slice of gee whiz Great Depression nostalgia for the whole family, I could just go see Annie, which is still literally playing right down the road while they're recording this at Radio City. If it's evidence of nothing else, it's that there is a legitimate sense of pathos in that original film, one which heavily relies on direction and production design as much as it does anything in the script. Take that out and don't replace it with anything, it just feels like a lot of fluff in a way the source material, miraculously, is not. If you're going to all the trouble of adapting a work to a different medium, you have to adjust for what you lose in translation. And I think that they were so caught up proving that they could put the movie on stage that they didn't ever stop to justify why. So case closed, it's best left alone even if you can add a real horse to it. Film is pure and untouchable, and nothing can ever change or be expanded upon. Well, okay.
So, what do you think? He likes it! Let him in!
Jump forward a couple decades and all of a sudden it's almost the Disneyland bicentennial and we gotta make some content to drive up theme park ticket sales. Cheapest way to pad out your new attraction lineup besides building a big-ass roller coaster is live shows, baby! Cause when it comes to the theme parks, Anaheim has not historically been as piss-terrified of changing literally anything as Orlando is, so you got a lot of live shows in rotation at Fantasyland Theater back in the day. Like, for context, Snow White an Enchanting Musical was following fucking Mickey's Detective School. There was not a gripping impulse to make the entertainment area appropriate. And honestly, from a production angle, this one is solid. Surprisingly solid. Good set design, costumes, prosthetics, everything is pretty tight for a theme park show. You might not be able to tell from this recording, but that is not a screen effect on the magic mirror. That's a fully articulated animatronic. That's a face. At the point this opens, we're still vaguely in the era of the mega musical. Like, Wicked had been making bank for a year and the Disney on Broadway machine was still firmly chugging along, so I guess they figured they could put a little extra juice in this thing to make it resemble a premium offering.
First, sets have to be designed and built. Costumes created and fitted. Lighting design. Choreography. Music and sound. Until at last, rehearsals begin.
Plus it's post-Cats, so no Uncanny Valley here, just people dressed like bluebirds doing ballet, which I never thought I would take as a net positive. The actual interesting material for us is in the script, which takes an unprecedented amount of care to give Snow White a much more visible arc. Because if there's anything these tourists keyed up on Dole Whip and Mickey pretzels waiting for their Matterhorn fast passes are worried about, it's consistent character writing. I will say right off the bat, the issue I found with both of these is that I think their characterizations of Snow White each swing a bit too hard in either direction. The dwarfs are easy, they all stay the same, but Snow White kinda wibbles. Radio City Snow White has not got a single thought in her brain, but on the other hand, Disneyland Snow White could stand to lighten the fuck up a little bit. Not like I don't think it's important for her to be vulnerable or have these conversations about her experience with her stepmother. I'm certainly glad that they are there, but since the show is as condensed as it is in only half an hour, we just spend a lot of time with Snow White being sad and insecure about never having friends, even though she already has friends, it's the animals, when a lot of her charm is that she picks herself up from a bad situation and makes friends. It's good in theory, but it might have actually thrived in a longer show where it had real time to develop. As is, it's just a bit overambitious. What I'm actually mad about is that they lowered the key of all of her songs. You are cowards!
And away to his castle we'll go. And away to his castle we'll go.
You sit on a throne of lies.
But credit where it's due, the reason she's got so many emotions in this thing is because they're actually talking out loud about how she's never had a life outside of her stepmother, and how the value of her relationship with the dwarfs is more than transactional. Everyone's talking, actually. Some might argue more than necessary.
There's a dance in your step, and your voice.
Silly things.
They reveal the beauty within. They show that your heart is true. And after all, it's the heart that matters.
Okay, using our words might kind of be a double-edged sword, but it is a conversation in our romance subplot during a half-hour adaptation of a 90-minute movie. The effort is there, we can acknowledge that. You really get a sense of what a seismic shift Shrek caused in this. Whoa! Oh my god! Why did I write that? You really get a sense of what a seismic shift Shrek caused in the cultural zeitgeist around fairy tale movies because they are really lighting the landing strip for you to get the point through your skull. Who's singing the first song? It's not Snow White and the Prince anymore. It's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And it's also just an excuse to get hi-ho in more than once. But it's far from lacking nuance altogether. I like the way they've translated and added to these interactions to make them more modern and obviously thematically relevant, without getting snide about it the way Shrek could, which is nice.
Although she lives with 7 other men, she's not easy.
There's a strong emphasis on how the relationship between Snow White and the dwarfs evolves and how they take care of each other, and I think it's an addition that bolsters what's already present in the movie. Even though it's very impressive how much they actually managed to add to a condensed version of the story, there are still little details you lose. With a Smile in a Song is gone outright, which is a shame because it's kind of a better character statement for Snow White than I'm Wishing.
Remember, you're the one who can fill the world with sunshine.
Turns out the Queen isn't nearly as cool or menacing when you just shove her over to stage left on a big fake tower for most of her time on stage. And Grumpy and Snow White don't really get that unique dynamic among the dwarfs past him being kinda skeptical about her once or twice, but he sure does whatever this noise is.
Grumpy?
This is not a substitute for watching the original film. It's a surprisingly good adaptation and just a good production all around, but at the end of the day, that time lost adds up and you do walk away wanting a little more. But it is a strong SparkNotes thesis of why the Disney version works, even if it's not entirely the same thing. It's clear that the creative team put a lot of thought into what they could do with the time they had and how to meet an antsy theme park audience halfway, and they largely pulled it off. And I think more than anything, it's interesting that you can narrow the window of time you have to tell this story and miraculously come out with something a little more substantive than just playing the hits. That original film's biggest problem was getting caught up in excessive cartoon goofery, so take that away and you're forced to hone in a little more on what's necessary to keep the show going. It expands it by shortening it, because it's a rare case where you can get away with that and not lose too much more than you need. Which is why I'm so excited for a 2.5-hour version of the movie with ugly CGI dwarfs and the dulcet tones of Pasek and fucking Paul.
Walt Disney's World on Ice presents Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, the entire magical story brought to life on ice.
Being that Snow White is such a keystone moment in Disney's history, there have certainly been attempts to keep it culturally relevant before throwing in the towel and feeding it to the content mill along with everything else. Mostly by taking Snow White out and trying to sell the dwarfs to little boys, which obviously didn't take. Look at this, they're playing a spin-off movie, a video game. I'm sorry, what? Snow White has a lot of little idiosyncrasies. I can find most of them charming. I get why others don't. I think it's obviously not much of a competition when you put it next to something like Beauty and the Beast, which is both a stronger film and more outwardly what contemporary audiences would consider a good film. But there are elements that work, elements which keep it engaging and worth revisiting beyond its novelty as a historical landmark. Because the thing is, even if a film's age leads to idiosyncrasies, they were still made with intention. This is not the result of cavemen slapping rocks together. Adult people had to make choices with the materials they had to produce art. Usually those choices are influenced by the social blind spots of their day, and sometimes that really takes the fucking rewatch value of these things. But sometimes they manage to maintain emotional relevance even as time moves along. And Snow White has proven to be much more the latter than it is the former, considering that for as deceptively straightforward as it is, no one else has been able to put a dent in its reputation as the most recognizable version of the story. I guess what I'm actually resistant to is this need to pull something out of this specific iteration of Snow White that simply is not there. I don't think it's illegal to make a new version of a fairy tale nobody actually owns, but I also don't get who wins when you try to bang this version into a shape it was never really meant to fit, especially because the movie working hinges on taking a very simple premise and structuring it in a way that will get you emotionally attached. Even in the title, there is a subliminal concession that we've kind of missed a massive point of why Disney's original film functions the way it does. The 2025 remake of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs is not called Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. It's just called Snow White. That's it. And I guess it's par for the course with them. Titles like Tangled and Frozen tested well, and how everything's better off as a 4-syllable adjective or less. And people are gonna call it that in movie theaters anyway, so I don't know why I'm complaining. But a lot of the dialogue around the film, and the fact that they didn't even seem to have a set plan for the dwarfs until earlier this year, when the movie was supposed to be done, kind of indicates that this is not an ensemble piece like the original, but really focused in on Snow White as a standalone protagonist. Snow White becoming the queen she was always meant to be?
That is not going to be saved by the prince. She's not going to be saved by the prince, and she's not going to be dreaming about true love. She's dreaming about becoming the leader she knows she can be, and the leader that her late father told her that she could be if she was fearless, fair, brave, and true.
Which I don't get. I don't get why you would take a movie which at its strongest is very much about celebrating friendship and community and think that the problem was a lack of focus on the individual. I mean, there is a problem, and it is a lack of focus, but not like that, because we've seen that every time they try to fix Snow White and turn her into a conventional empowered girl heroine, it inevitably becomes some bizarre divine right of king shit where Snow White has to be the chosen one to avenge her dad and heal the entire kingdom, which, that is not the stakes of this story. I know if you're gonna make a big blockbuster movie in the 20s, you gotta shove everything into this dumbass save the cat format, but Disney's Snow White is simply not a blockbuster on that scale. That it exists was the spectacle once upon a time. And that's really the struggle in figuring out what to do with it. You can't make it bigger by modern standards without T-boning the structure, but you also can't just do a one-to-one remake of the story and send it out to die. Just look at the Hobbit movie. We seem to understand that we can't really do that to a film like The Wizard of Oz. That's why we compromise with our Wickeds or Oz the Great and Powerful. Because the magic of a film having lived that long and still holding up to any metric is impossible to replicate for a quick buck. At the time of writing, I think it's fair to say that while we've socially progressed a few 100 miles further than the Depression-era audience the movie was aiming for, we're not exactly marginally better off right now. We like to pretend we're doing fine because we've been successfully gaslit as a society under capitalism into viewing financial struggle as a personal failure, but this past year in particular, we have really started to see the dam break. And at that point, once it does, what's left when you get laid off before you become a CEO? Or you can't pull together the money to go into women in STEM? What do you do when you can't win the things that are wrong in your life in a strong female way? Sorry, Ben, before you get excited, the moral is not to become your creepy virginal trad wife. You find your people. You make your own family. You put together a new normal. And you do that by keeping an open mind and putting your trust in the kindness of others. It's the scariest thing we can do sometimes, but we're just not built to make it through alone. We're built, ultimately, to take care of each other and believe that people will instinctively do the same. And if you do believe that, you might not escape the bad ones outright, but the good ones will make their way to you somehow. And I am never, ever, ever in a million years gonna cite good old Union Buster Uncle Walt as a primary source again, but by his own admission, that is the point.
Everybody in the world was once a child. We grow up, our personalities change, but in every one of us, something remains of our childhood.
You mean that's a common denominator?
That just about sums it up, Mr. DeMille. The same level you speak of knows nothing of sophistication and distinction. It's where all of us are simple and naive, without prejudice and bias. We're friendly and trusting. And it just seems to me that if your picture hits that spot in one person, it's going to hit that same spot in almost everybody.
If I were being more optimistic than I'm capable of, and I really do try, I'd say that this is exactly why we need this movie in this moment, considering a lot of young people can't make rent without living with eclectic gay roommates, but they have been cooking this thing since the goddamn Clinton campaign, and the party line on what it's gonna be has not changed.
Snow White is running for president.
I do not think we are in for any timely social commentary from the Walt Disney Company, but I also don't plan on seeing it anyways, and unless some revelatory new information comes out, this essay is about as much thought as I'll pay it before returning to peacefully not giving a shit. If you're part of the audience which has never been convinced to seek the original movie out because you feel like you've already culturally osmosed it through memes, I do it just to form your own opinion and say you've watched a piece of history, if nothing else. I personally think the odds are better than not that you'll find something to love, or at least appreciate, even if it doesn't top your list anytime soon. And if New Snow White, directed by Mark Webb and featuring the music of Dear Evan Hansen, is bad, cause God, how could it possibly be with that creative team? And you still go all the way down the chain of command to make it Rachel Zegler's problem? Trust me, don't bother fooling yourself about why you're really upset.